as part of our Road Together journey this season, this Lenten season, we've been communicating different aspects of what it truly means to be a Jesus-centered church.
Yeah, so I did a video about how being a Jesus-centered church means that we wonder about things. Because some people think being a Jesus-centered church, or maybe more Bible-centered church, means you answered all the questions and you don't really have all these deep conversations and wonder about things. But Jesus is always challenging us to wonder about things. That's what we see in the Gospels. And then Mike Herzberger and I did a conversation about how putting Jesus at the center of our theology and our thinking really gives us a different lens for understanding Christianity and how you look at things and how you live as a Christian.
So today we thought we'd talk about, or have a conversation about, how being a Jesus-centered church means, and this is a kind of funky word here, a church that beholds people. That's a funny title. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a little quirky to talk about being a church that beholds, because we don't really use the word behold a lot. And my original title for this conversation, was being a church that really sees people. But I think if you asked most people, especially most Christians, do you really see people? They'd be like, well, yeah, sure. But when you say beholds, it's like, behold, right? Mm-hmm. And I even looked up the origin of that word. And the word behold comes from a couple of Old English words, and it means to hold something in your view, or to hold something in your gaze, so to really look at it.
So let me ask you this, I guess. What is it about specifically being a church that beholds people? Aren't all churches about people?
Well, at first glance, you would say, yeah, all churches are about people. And in a sense, they are, because churches are people. But I also think that when we look at the history of the Christian faith, it's actually very easy for the church, and often for individual Christians, to chase other things that in the end eclipse our view of people.
But I would have to think that virtually every church that you would ever go into, if you ask them, they'd say, we really care about people.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think if you went into almost any church and said, do you care about people? They'd say, oh yeah, we care about people. And I think they do. And in their defense, I think most of the time the ways we lose sight of people are unintentional. I don't think churches, ours or anybody else's, are out there saying, hey, let's lose sight of people. It's not that we decide not to really see people. It's more that we begin to believe that something else, or maybe several something else's, are so important. And in emphasizing how important, making those things the big thing, our view just gets shifted a little bit. And we begin to lose sight of people.
Well, do you think that's happened at LifeSpring?
I don't think it's happened at LifeSpring, except in, smaller situations, here and there. Every church has quirky things that happen. But here's the thing. So no, I'm not saying that at LifeSpring we don't behold people. What I am saying, what is that if we want to be a church that sees and thinks and walks and talks like Jesus, we have to be really, really, really clear on this. Like, this has to be a value that's down in our bones.
Okay, so give me some examples of what you're talking about specifically.
Well, an easy one is the story from my sermon on Sunday. The religious people, in that story in Luke 7, the religious people, they don't really see this woman. Not really. Mm-hmm. This woman that comes in and she's weeping all over Jesus' feet. Why don't they see her? Well, like I just said, they don't see her because something else has become so important for them, that it has eclipsed their view of people. So for them, that's this very technical, very mechanical understanding of what God requires in terms of behavior, in their case of keeping the law, and the extent to which you have to do that to not end up on God's bad side. In their view, even Jesus is on God's bad side at this point, because he's letting this woman who is unclean, he's letting this woman touch him. And here's the thing. I think if you would have asked those Pharisees at that dinner party, do you care about people? I think they would have said yes. But because this mentality of just seeing God in terms of being the judge, and this mentality of that the faith journey is about avoiding judgment, and that because that's the dominant way they define their faith, what they think people exist for is obedience to those laws. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, well, how does Jesus see things differently?
Okay, so that's in the Gospels. That's a long time ago. But what are some examples of the way that happens in the modern church in these days?
How many do you want?
Lay 'em
I
on me.
don't mean to sound
Lay 'em on
critical,
me.
okay? I don't mean to sound critical, but it's like, well, how many you want? You know, I can go back to an example that's some people can relate to from their growing up years in church, right? So some of us grew up in churches that were very focused on religious rituals, right? You and I both grew up in liturgical churches, right? And you gotta come into church, and you've got to do these things, and you have to be there on holy days of obligation, and right? All these different things. So the way people got viewed is, and people wouldn't have said this, and those churches wouldn't have said this, but the way, in a subtle way, people get viewed like this, that what they're here for is to do those rituals. That's what God's looking for. Or you can find churches that are legalistic, right? You know, like if you hear the word legalistic, legal means law. So kind of like those Pharisees, they frame the role of people in their thinking in terms of whether people are keeping the rules, right? That becomes the dominant thing. Starts to get your eyes off the humanity of the people. Or there are churches that get very focused on doctrine, to such an extent that what people are here for is to believe exactly the right things. And we're going to tell them what those are in our church. And we're going to tell them we've got all the right Christian everything figured out, and this is the stuff that you need to believe. And in one sense, it seems to me in the American church, like that kind of emphasis on perfect doctrine has kind of faded over the last 40 years. But, you know, we're all old enough to know, or a lot of us are old enough to know now that everything comes back around. So like in recent years, the young Reformed movement in the church, people might not know what that is, but the young Reformed movement has gotten kind of like that, where we have this whole theological system worked out, and to be on the right path, you need to believe all these things exactly like we do. So here's what it is. So what people are here for is to believe all the exact right things. That's what God is looking for from people. Or you can even take elements of the modern charismatic movement. You know, I'm a Holy Spirit guy. Linda and I have a charismatic background, and we believe that the Holy Spirit is real, and the Holy Spirit does things in people's lives and dwells within us. But you can get so focused on supernatural things that it changes how you see people. And in that paradigm, what are people here for? They're here to whoop up enough faith to get God to do the miracle, right? That's not what the Apostle Paul would have said. He said they're here to become a new human being. They're here to become a new man, a new woman, to become like Christ, you know? And that can even seem like caring about people, right? Like, well, we want people to have these healings, and we want people, but somehow what it often does is it limits the depth with which we see people. We're chasing all these other things that we think are the big things. So
yeah, those are examples that seem pretty obvious, especially when you have churches that get focused on the legalistic or moral conformity. But do you think that there are things that we get focused on that shift our gaze that are less obvious?
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things in the last 20 or 30 years has been what I call the church as enterprise. It started out with a good motive, maybe longer than 20 or 30 years, going back to the 70s and the 80s. Really young people are going to be like, what's the 70s? Anyway, but you know, it started out with this desire like, hey, let's make the church more contemporary and more hip and more flashy and better music and good stage lights, and we're going to reach all these people. But what happens is we start to get not just focused on reaching more people, but we get focused on the success of the church in terms of how big the congregation is and how many programs we have. And again, we would all say, yes, if you just heard that on the recording, that's our cat, who occasionally just yawls very loud.
Very loudly.
So that's Winnie. So you may hear Winnie again, because Leslie and I are in my living room. So, and again, we would say, yes, we care about people, and we do, but in another way, if you're focused on all this, like success, we got to get more people, and the church has to be cooler, and all these things. what happens is people become a means to an end. And that end is the success of the church, and it causes a subtle shift in how we see people. And I will confess that in the early days of our church, because I wanted us to be successful, I often tended to see people as kind of a means to that growth end. And I hate it now when I look back and I go, oh, Fran Lehman, what were you thinking, So, and here's another example. So that's kind of, getting too focused on success in the church can mess you up about how you see people. But here's another one in the culture and also in the church, is that we've let all the political partisanship define how we see people. And in our minds, we sort people according to this. So we might decide how worthy a person is, or how we might approach our relationship with them based on whether they're liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican, or for or against a certain politician, or where they stand on a certain issue. And I don't see Jesus sorting people along those kinds of lines. When we see in the Gospels, Jesus never walks up to people and says, are you with the Pharisees or the Herodians? What's the deal? He just sees the person.
He's not doing the sorting hat.
Right. Yeah. So I don't see Jesus doing that.
So what do you think then should we be seeing when we look at people?
See, that's the question, right? That's the question. What should we be seeing? And we're talking about being a church centered in what? We're talking about being a church centered in the heart of God that we see revealed in Jesus, in the actual teachings of Jesus, and in the ways that Jesus models for us. So if we go back to the Gospels and we listen to Jesus and we watch Jesus, what do we hear? What do we see? The religious people are all asking if everybody, Winnie, be quiet. We're recording. She likes attention. She's 18 years old and she likes a lot of attention now. So she used to ignore us and now she wants us all the time.
She comes over and bringing her up.
The religious people, they're all asking, when we go to the Gospels, they're all asking, is everybody morally conforming enough? Are they keeping the law? Are they believing the right things? And Jesus seems to be asking a different set of things.
Yeah. When I read anything about Jesus, he's always very people focused. So what kinds of things do you think that he's asking or wondering about?
Okay. All kinds of things. Here are some examples. I think Jesus is looking at people and he's wondering, what has happened to you? Think about the woman we just talked about on Sunday in Luke chapter 7, right? We don't know her story. We aren't given her story. But she at great risk and in great fear, barges into this Pharisee's dinner party because she wants to get to Jesus, and she's weeping on his feet and her heart is breaking open. And it's this gratitude because somehow she has experienced with Jesus, a grace and a love and a mercy that's given her hope and the possibility of a fresh start. And so Jesus is wondering, well, what has happened to a person that brings them to this place where they're so wounded and so destroyed? Or think of the woman caught in adultery in John's gospel. Jesus is wondering, are you buried under shame? Right? He says to her, where are all the guys that were condemning you? And she looks around and she says, they're gone. He says, well, neither do I condemn you. I didn't come to push your face in the dirt, right? Are you buried under shame? Because I want to bring you out of that. Jesus is wondering what would happen if someone treated you not like an outcast, but reminded you of your worth. He goes to Jericho, right? Everybody in Jericho hates Zacchaeus. He's the traitor tax collector. Jesus says, hey man, I want to come to your house for dinner. I want to hang out with you. And Zacchaeus is like, you want to hang out with me? Right. Yeah, Jesus is like, I see something in you, right? Or Jesus looking at people, he's wondering, do you need healing? Do you want healing? A couple times in the Gospels, Jesus is like, do you want to get well? Do you want to see? Jesus is wondering, do you know that God is good? Or is that messing you up too, that you have this picture of God, right? That God is just up there judging you. He's got his big baseball bat. He's waiting to swing. So Jesus is always trying to say to people, do you understand God is good? That if you ask God for bread, he's not going to give you a rock. He's not like that. He's wondering this. Do you know, Leslie Zarita, that you are more than meets the eye? Because religion will define you as a shallow creature that needs to obey. And the culture will define you, our culture will define you as a shallow person that needs to consume and chase pleasure. And Jesus is wondering, do you know that as an image bearer of God, that as a human being, you are so much more, than that. So,
yeah, so those are all people questions.
right.
Do you think that some people, maybe even some people watching this, will think that if we get too focused on people, then we're taking the focus off of God?
Well, here's the funny thing about that. Actually, I have a funny story about that.
Okay.
So in the church that Linda and I were part of before we began LifeSpring, a long time ago, this was a frequent debate among the leaders. I was an elder in that church and on staff in that church part-time. And this was a frequent debate, this question of like, how much do you focus on God? How much is it about God versus how much is it about people? And there was this one elder in the church who, in our leadership conversations, would get a little too people-focused. He would always say to us, church is for God. Church is not about people. We come in here to worship God, to tell God that he is worthy, and it's not about focusing on all these people. It's about focusing on God. And what he meant by that was that God is the one worthy of our worship. Agreed.
Right.
So we're supposed to be focused on him, not on all these, he probably would have said unworthy people, right? I also think about the opening line of Rick Warren's super popular book from a number of years ago. A lot of people will remember that book, The Purpose-Driven Life. And the first line is, it's not about you. And Rick's a good guy. And that elder in our old church was a good guy. But here's the problem with all that. When the God of the universe puts on human flesh and comes down here and walks among us in the person of Jesus, what does he focus on? People. He focuses on people. In fact, that's the singular thing that separates him from all the religious people of his day. Yeah. He's going around loving people, talking to people, healing people, welcoming the excluded people and the outcast, delivering people from shame, delivering from that mentality that God is all judgment. I mean, it's a people ministry for Jesus.
So what I hear you saying is that where our faith is a profound, spiritual and transforming thing, that's good.
That's good.
But wherever it becomes something that somehow kind of moves us away from holding people in their depth in our view, that's bad.
Yeah. For me, I look at people and I wonder three things normally. I'm just talking about like when I meet somebody, I start to become friends with somebody, or I just get to know them a little bit. Sometimes I wonder about about the person at the cash register at the grocery store who's working the cash register, is I wonder what they really are. I want to look deep enough at a person to see their unique glory, right? Because there's a glory there. We're made in the image of God. Yeah, there's sin. That's the mess. But under that, there's a glory. So I wonder what they really are. Secondly, I wonder what has happened to them, because our wounds are the clues to most of our sin and our dysfunction, our messiness. That comes mostly, it's mostly starts out as our woundedness, right? And third, I wonder, well, how can they come back from that and find restoration? And honestly, I wonder, like, how can my loving them, having a relationship with them, how can maybe God use that as some small part of that process so that people can find their way back to the healing and the truth and the joy that they were made for.
All right, so I have to say it. I have to put it there. You used the word messiness.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think people are messy? I'm messy. I'm messy. How do you think people are messy?
How do I think people are messy? People are all kinds of messy, and the messiness goes the gamut from a little messy to a lot messy.
The people watching this video are messy.
Yeah, and I am messy as well, just to be clear. I don't know, like, I see people have messiness in relationships. Yeah. So kind of that I hurt you, you hurt me, I hurt you back thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm messy with my relationships. There's sometimes that maybe I'm at a place where I'm feeling I need to get a little bit more from a relationship. Right. And so then maybe I don't handle it well and I'm a little messy.
Right.
People are messy with their kids. A lot of people want to be the ruler of the house, the ruler of the kids, and you're going to conform. And in that they stop maybe being loving in a way that shapes their children into being the beautiful human beings they're supposed to be, and they maybe throw a little bit of messiness in there instead. Right. You're messy with people at work. There's all kinds of messy.
It's all kinds of messy, and a lot of it is messy that comes out of our heads, like if our self-image is a little wonky, which for most of us it is, that can lead to insecurity, causes us to be reactive in relationships, all these things. These are things Jesus is trying to teach us who we really are, right? And he's trying to teach us, he's trying to change our hearts. He's trying to drive away the fears that come from the wounds that make us messy people, right? But here's the thing, despite our messiness, I think one of the things that's happened to me over the years, because this was not true almost 3 decades ago when we planted this church. Like, I've fallen in love with people. I'm curious about people because people are fascinating. A lot of times if you're just moving quick through life, like you're not stopping and going, that person's interesting.
Right.
It could be interesting, good, interesting, quirky, but interesting, right? So I'm fascinated by people, and I think people are amazing. Everybody is amazing in some way. You might have to look harder for it with some people, but I'm telling you, everybody is amazing. The messiness might keep you from seeing it, but everybody is amazing. And yeah, that's what's happened to me over the years is I have fallen in love with this whole thing God has made called human beings. What do you love about people? Let me ask you that.
I love everything. No, seriously. I love people a lot.
I know you do. That's why I'm asking you that, because it's like you're a people lover.
I am a people lover. There's nothing more meaningful, I guess, for me than to meet somebody and think, okay, I want to get to know this person more. And as I get to know that person more, they start to tell stories, and those stories resonate with me in different ways. And their interests and my interests mesh together, or they don't mesh together. And I think, I want to know more about that.
And you think, well, that's sort of interesting.
Right. So I guess for me, it's a matter of finding the beauty in people, because there are so many beautiful things about pretty much every person you meet.
Yeah.
And I can't ever stop looking for those things in people, because it makes those people have a more meaningful piece in my life.
Yeah. It's kind of like we were saying earlier about how Jesus is wondering, do you know that you're more than meets the eye? People are more than meets the eye.
Right.
And so often in life, we're bouncing off each other, and we do that in the church. And if we really get focused on all these other things that we've been talking about, and we stop beholding people, then we're really bouncing off each other.
Right.
But when we hold people in our gaze, and we say, who is this person? Then we just, we realize like there's so much to this one person. Every person is like a universe within themselves, and it's an amazing thing. It is. It's an amazing thing.
And, I want to just kind of circle back for 1 second, back to that word behold. And I think for me, I've never really framed my thinking in beholding people. But as we kind of talked about this afternoon, it made me think, okay, when I see a sunset and I look at the sunset, and it's there, I am holding it and gazing upon it and beholding it.
Yeah, you're not just taking a look.
Right.
You're beholding it.
Right.
And you're looking at it and you're going, wow. Wow.
Right.
That's what I think when I look at people.
Right. And I think that's what we need.
I mean, it would be odd, I guess, if when I meet people, I stared at them and I said, wow.
You might be like, people might think you're a creeper, so that probably would be ill-advised.
But people are wow.
People are wow. And I think one of the most important things is trying to figure out how people are wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
absolutely.
You talked about how seeing people just in terms of the church's growth can take us off track. And that's absolutely true. But do you want LifeSpring to grow, for us to reach more people and to see our congregation get larger and have a bigger impact?
I do. But not because we need to be successful. See, that's the thing, right? We don't need to be successful. We don't have anything to prove. That's the wrong motive, to say, we want our church to be this, whatever. The right motive is because people matter. And so, let's reach out. with LifeSpring. Let's shout it from the housetops. Let's make LifeSpring known as we go into the rest of this year and the year after that. Let's invite as many people as we can to this great God and new life party that we're talking about. But as we do it, because that's what we're going to try to do. I mean, I don't know if people realize that. Like, we're going to start talking about, man, how do we make LifeSpring known? How do we get outside our walls and touch people's lives? You know, as we do that, let's never take our eyes off the apple of God's eye, which is human beings.
Right. And I have to say one more thing. You know, I've said this before about how LifeSpring is for me and for my family, how this is a place that I don't think I could find anywhere else. That's not what this is about. This is about, because I feel like that, I need to share that, because there's people outside our walls who are looking for something just like this, and they can find it, but they have to know that it's there.
And yes, and because they need to encounter a Jesus and a Jesus people who are wondering all these real things that really matter about them and about their life, who are really seeing people and saying, hey, we know where the good stuff is.
Right.
And we'll love you, and we'll take your hand, and you come with us, and we'll help you find your way in to these things.
So they need a place where people will behold them.
They need a place where people will behold them. And that's my dream for everybody that either walks through our door or we come into contact with out there, that people feel like, wow, I've been seen. I've really been seen, you know? And with that seen is sort of an invitation in, you know? And man, what a good conversation. You know, we talk about all these things. It's simple, right? We want to see people like Jesus sees people. He really sees them. He beholds them. And we want to love them, and we want to see people find all the good stuff that Jesus came to bring to all of us. And it's good. So anyway, hey, thanks for having this conversation with me.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. It's awesome. So, and thanks to all of you for watching and taking these few minutes to kind of listen to us chat about these things. And we hope you're drinking it in deeply, because we're going to go places as a church you never thought we were going to go. And I'm excited about that. And hey, if we don't see you before, we'll see you on Sunday.